The second thing that will end nationalism in the United States was much more important, and it is the first major debate between the North and the South in Congress regarding slavery. Now, if you remember, originally slavery was in all 13 of the colonies, and then at the time of the American Revolution, all the states north of the Mason-Dixon line, that's the line separating Maryland and Pennsylvania, voluntarily got rid of slavery because they didn't need it economically. There had been some little issues over slavery, but nothing major until this. In 1819, state of Missouri applied for statehood. It applied to enter the Union as a slave state. At the time, there was an even balance of 11 free states and 11 slave states. Now, the North always had the bigger population, so in the House of Representatives, Northerners or free states had more people. So free states had a majority in the House of Representatives, but in the Senate, because there's 11 free and 11 slave, it was balanced, 22 senators to 22 senators. When Missouri applied for statehood, a congressman from New York named James Talmadge issued what's called the Talmadge Amendment. The Talmadge Amendment said, okay, Missouri can come in as a slave state, but no new slaves are allowed in after it enters the Union, and once it becomes a state, all slaves, or everyone who's born a slave in Missouri, will be free by the age of 25. So no new slaves are allowed in, and all slaves born in the state will be free at the age of 25. So obviously this means over a long period of time, slavery would end in Missouri. This is called gradual emancipation. Make sure you remember that. Gradual emancipation. This is the same thing New York did. That way they weren't just saying all slaves are free immediately, but they were going to gradually emancipate them. So slave owners would have, more than 25 years to prepare for the end of slavery. Although the Talmadge Amendment, it passed in the House of Representatives, where free states had a majority, but it got to the Senate and it did not pass because Southern states were completely and totally opposed to this. Southerners were totally unified in their opposition. Even Jefferson, who had retired at this time, he was 77, he came out very strongly against the Talmadge Amendment. Southerners were furious too. This was said on the floor of Congress. Thomas W. Cobb, a congressman from the South, told Talmadge, "You have kindled a fire which all of the waters of the ocean cannot put out, which seas of blood can only extinguish." Talmadge responded to him, "If a dissolution of the Union must take place, let it be so. If civil war, which gentlemen so much threaten, must come, I can only say, let it come." This is 1819, so we're talking way before the Civil War. Now, why did things get so heated over slavery in Missouri? Why were Southerners so upset about this? There's a few reasons, and this is really important to know. First, there's the political reason. Southerners in Congress, they were always going to have a minority in the House of Representatives because the North will always have a bigger population. So they had to make sure that they could stay balanced in the Senate. Otherwise, Congress would be completely controlled by free states and then could pass whatever they wanted. So Southerners, for political reasons, were completely unified. Southerners were also upset by a constitutional argument. And this one will come up again and again. And what Southerners said was, slaves are property, and according to the Constitution, the government's job is to protect property. So the government cannot restrict slavery. And this constitutional issue would go back and forth. But really importantly, when Southerners were making this debate at this time, they still were calling slavery a necessary evil. Same thing the Founding Fathers said. Slavery is a necessary evil. Like they understood, yeah, slavery is not great, slavery is bad, but it's absolutely essential to the economy, which we'll talk about that more later. But there's an economic, you have to understand the economics. So they were calling it a necessary evil. They were not calling slavery a positive good yet. That won't come till later. So there was the constitutional debate. But the third reason Southerners were so angry, and the reason it is so important to know, why exactly was a representative from New York making this an issue about slavery in Missouri? Why did James Talmadge care in the first place? What is he saying? He's saying slavery is wrong. And this is the most important thing to, well, most important, this is absolutely vital to understand slavery. When Talmadge was doing this, he was telling Southerners slavery is wrong. That's why he cares about it. There's a moral argument. If you live in South Carolina, can you accept this? Can you accept his argument that slavery is immoral in Missouri? Of course not, because then if it's immoral in Missouri, it's going to be immoral in South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, everywhere else. So Southerners, they intrinsically cannot accept the Northern position that slavery is morally wrong. Because if they accept that moral argument in Missouri, then they have to accept it everywhere else. So, they're willing to say it's a necessary evil, but they were not willing to let Northerners do anything to influence slavery. The moral argument is where this will get hung up. Political arguments, even constitutional arguments, those can be compromised. You can work those out. Moral arguments, though, generally are solved with bloodshed. These debates got really heated. Obviously, people are talking about civil war. Something had to be done, so in stepped Henry Clay. Henry Clay came in and he came up with a compromise, and this is really, really important. You absolutely must know this. It's called the Missouri Compromise. While this whole debate was going on, Maine applied for statehood also. So the first part of the Missouri Compromise is Maine comes in as a free state, Missouri comes in as a slave state. And nothing is said about slavery in Missouri. That way, there's still an equal balance of free states and slave states in the country. So that is the first part. So there's no gradual emancipation in Missouri. Missouri comes in as a slave state, and Maine comes in as a free state. Second part of this, and this you absolutely must know, is the Missouri Compromise line. The 3630 line. You can see it on the map there. It's right above what's called the Arkansas Territory and below Missouri. This said no slavery is allowed in the Louisiana Territory. So that area that says unorganized territory, that's everything. That was all what was called the Louisiana Territory that was bought from France. It said no slaves are allowed north of 3630 in the Louisiana Territory. Did not apply to that whole other part of the country that Spain owned at this point in time, but make sure you know this, because if you want to know the origins of the Republican Party that is around today, it is the 3630 line of the Missouri Compromise. It will come back up in 34 years from 1820, and this is the origins of the modern day Republican Party. So make sure you remember this line, 3630. So a compromise was worked out. But the Missouri Compromise will have several important significances, several important points to it. First and foremost, this made Henry Clay into nationally famous. This is Henry Clay's first major compromise. Henry Clay is known, he'll be known for more than 30 years for two things. One, he had the most advanced economic ideas of his age. Alexander Hamilton had the most advanced economic ideas of the founding generation. Henry Clay had the most advanced economic ideas of this period. And second thing Henry Clay is known for is his compromises. His nickname is the Great Compromiser, because he will come up with several major compromises at key points in U.S. history. So that's the first significance. Second, this ended nationalism. Southerners had supported a protective tariff. Tariffs were good for the North, where business was, but it was bad for Southerners, where they were the economy was just based on agriculture. But during the period of nationalism, Southerners had supported the protective tariff. John C. Calhoun introduced the legislation for the first protective tariff in U.S. history. After this, Southerners will turn against economic nationalism. They will oppose the protective tariff continuously after this. Northerners had attacked their economic interest, slavery, so Southerners will not support Northerners' economic interest. Third significance, it broke up the Republican Party. Remember, there's only one party in the country at the time, and it's the Republican Party of Jefferson. It's not at all the same Republican Party that's around today. This will break up the Republican Party along sectional lines. Southern Republicans or pro-slavery were against, were really pissed off, and Northern Republicans, where the free states were also pissed off. So the Republican Party, it was obviously splitting. And the fourth significance of this, the Missouri Controversy, Missouri Compromise, was the starting point of Southerners being absolutely solidly unified in their opposition to gradual emancipation anywhere. And gradual emancipation, it sounds like a good idea. You don't get rid of slavery immediately, let people have time to get rid of it. But Southerners will be absolutely unified from here on out in their opposition. There'll be some, we'll come back to this later, but Southerners almost have to be unified in their opposition to anything that will attack slavery, because, again, they're the minority. Jefferson, again, he was still alive, but he said it very well. This momentous question, like a fired bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once as the knell of the Union. And by knell, he means the death knell. So he's saying this in 1820. He understood that this is the beginning of what would come to destroy the country. It is hushed, indeed, for the moment, but this is a reprieve only, not a final sentence. A geographic line coinciding with a marked principle, moral and political, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men, will never be obliterated. And he was absolutely right. Slavery would not go away. The issue of slavery would not go away. Slavery would go away, obviously.